Brianna cried first, which, knowing my sister, was itself a calculated move. Tears have always been her first line of defense, the emotional equivalent of a smokescreen deployed to buy time while she figures out her next angle. I have watched her cry her way out of trouble since we were children. I know exactly what her real tears look like versus her performance tears. These were performance tears, but underneath them, something genuine was cracking. "Okay," she finally whispered. "Okay." Just that one word, but the weight of it filled my entire living room. "There's no baby," she said. I had known it was coming. I had built an entire strategy around the probability of hearing exactly those three words. And still, hearing them out loud from her own mouth in my own apartment over cooling cups of tea, it hit me somewhere deep and raw that I hadn't fully prepared for. Not because I was surprised, but because of what it meant about who my sister actually was. "How long?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. I'm still proud of that. "I was never pregnant," she said quietly. "I made it up." "Why?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and when she looked up at me, there was something almost relieved in her expression, the way people look when they've been carrying something too heavy for too long and have finally been forced to set it down. "Because I panicked," she said. "When you got engaged, when I saw that ring, something just broke open in me. I knew Marcus and I had history, I knew he'd chosen you, and I'd told myself for 3 years that I was fine with it, that I'd moved on." She shook her head. "But seeing that ring made it real in a way nothing else had." "So you fabricated a pregnancy to blow up my engagement?" I thought. She stopped, started again. "I thought if there was a baby, he'd have to choose. He'd have to deal with me. I'd become impossible to ignore." I let that sit for a moment. Here is the part that broke something in me that night. Not her confession, not even the lie itself. What broke me was the next thing she said, quietly, almost to herself. "I've been in love with him since before you even knew he existed, Cassidy." 28 years of sisterhood, 17 years sharing a bedroom, every secret, every heartbreak, every milestone witnessed and celebrated. And underneath it all, for 3 entire years, this, a love she'd buried and hidden and finally weaponized the moment she felt it slipping permanently away. If you've ever discovered that someone's betrayal came from a wound you never knew they were carrying, subscribe, because what I had to decide next was the hardest thing I've ever faced. Because now I knew the truth. The question was, what was I going to do with it? I sat with the truth for a long time after Brianna left that night. Not hours, days. I moved through the following 72 hours like a woman operating slightly outside her own body, going through the mechanical motions of living, showering, working, eating things I couldn't taste, while the real version of me sat quietly in some interior room, turning the situation over and over, examining it from every angle, like a stone you find on a beach that might be ordinary or might be something rare. Everyone in my life had an opinion about what I should do next. Tasha thought I should expose Brianna publicly and completely, tell the whole family, let the consequences rain down, allow everyone to see exactly who she was. My coworker Dana, who I'd confided in on lunch on Wednesday, thought I should cut both Marcus and Brianna off permanently and never look back. My mother, who I hadn't yet told the full truth, kept calling to ask when we were going to finalize the wedding venue. I didn't call her back. Because here is what nobody else understood, what I was sitting alone with in my apartment for 3 days. The person I was most furious at wasn't Brianna. It was Marcus. Brianna had been operating from a wound, a terrible, destructive, inexcusable wound, but a wound nonetheless. What she did was wrong in ways I don't have language adequate enough to fully describe. She had weaponized a fake pregnancy against her own sister. She had tried to detonate my future to salvage something she'd decided she was owed. But Marcus had known about their history and said nothing. Marcus had received texts from my sister, texts intimate enough to include heart emojis and sentences about pretending, and had never once come to me. Marcus, by his own admission, turned to my sister during a rough patch in our relationship, instead of turning to me. Marcus had looked me in the face at our engagement party, at 100 dinners, across 3 years of building a life together, and had carried this secret like it was his right to carry it alone. I picked up my engagement ring from the bathroom counter where I'd placed it 4 days earlier, held it in my palm. It was beautiful, a simple solitaire, exactly what I'd always wanted, chosen with what I'd believed was intimate knowledge of who I was. I closed my fingers around it. Then I opened my laptop and did something nobody expected. I started writing, not a confrontational text, not an angry email, a list, clear, organized, decisive, the list of everything I needed to do to protect myself going forward, starting with one item at the very top that made my hands shake slightly as I typed it. If you've ever chosen yourself in a moment when every emotion was begging you to choose chaos instead, hit that like button and subscribe. Because my decision wasn't revenge. It was something so much more powerful than that. The first item on my list was the hardest one, which is exactly why I put it at the top. I called Marcus on Saturday morning, 7 days after the confession, and I asked him to meet me at Piedmont Park, the same place he'd proposed. I chose the location deliberately, not for sentimentality, but for symbolism. Some chapters need to be closed in the same place they were opened. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near the fountain, elbows on his knees, looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in a week, which, honestly, was the least he deserved. He stood when he saw me, and I watched hope and dread fight for control of his expressions simultaneously. I sat down. He sat beside me. I kept 12 inches of bench between us. "I know there's no pregnancy," I said. No preamble, no small talk. Marcus exhaled like I'd removed something heavy from his chest. "Cassidy," I continued. "She told me everything. The lie, the timeline, the reason, all of it." He pressed his hands over his face. "I was going to tell you. I had started to suspect she'd fabricated it, the way she kept avoiding giving me any details, the appointment that kept getting postponed. But you didn't tell me," I said. "Again." The word "again" landed exactly the way I intended it to. He flinched. "Marcus, I need you to understand something." I turned to look him directly. "The pregnancy was Brianna's lie, but the secrets, the history you hid from me, the texts you didn't tell me about, the moment in February when you turned toward my sister instead of toward me, those were yours. And I can't build a marriage on a foundation that already has fractures running through it." His eyes were wet. "I love you. I have never stopped." "I know you love me," I said quietly. "I believe that. But love isn't the only thing a marriage requires. It requires honesty, consistency, the kind of courage it takes to have hard conversations before they become catastrophes." I paused. "You didn't have that courage, and I can't spend the rest of my life wondering when the next secret is going to surface." I reached into my coat pocket. I placed the engagement ring on the bench between us. Marcus stared at it like it was something that had fallen from a great height. "I'm not doing this in anger," I said. "I'm doing this because I know my own worth, and I know what I will and won't accept for the rest of my life." I stood up, smoothed my coat. "If you've ever walked away from something you loved because you loved yourself more, subscribe. Because that walk across Piedmont Park was the most difficult and most necessary thing I have ever done, and it was only the beginning of what I had planned. Let me be very clear about something before I tell you what happened next. What I did was not petty. It was not vindictive. It was not the kind of messy, explosive revenge that makes for dramatic television but leaves everyone involved more damaged than before. I am not that woman. I have never been that woman. What I engineered over the following 2 weeks was something far more elegant, far more permanent, and far more satisfying than anything driven purely by anger could ever be. I call it consequence delivery. Brianna had escaped accountability her entire life because our family system was built on a foundation of keeping peace at any cost. Our mothers smoothed things over. Our aunts changed the subject. Everyone absorbed Brianna's chaos quietly and then moved on, which had taught her, over 26 years, that there was no real price to pay for her behavior, that she could detonate things and walk away clean while other people sorted through the wreckage. That lesson ended here. The first thing I did was tell my mother the truth, all of it. I drove to her house on a Sunday afternoon and sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten 10,000 childhood meals, and I told her everything from beginning to end without softening a single edge. The secret history between Marcus and Brianna, the texts, the cafe confrontation, the fake pregnancy deployed like a weapon at the most vulnerable moment of my life. My mother is a quiet woman who expresses shock through absolute stillness. She sat across from me and did not move for almost a full minute after I finished. Then she said, "She came to my house last week. She sat right where you're sitting and told me you'd called off the engagement because of cold feet." I let that sink in for both of us. "She was rewriting the story," I said, before I had a chance to tell it. My mother stood up, walked to the window, and stood there looking at the backyard for a long moment. When she turned around, her expression had hardened into something I recognized, the particular set of her jaw that meant she had made a decision and nothing on earth was going to move her from it. She said, "I'll handle your Aunt Renee and the cousins. You handle everything else." We were a team for the first time in years. The second thing I did was call a mutual friend, someone who sat in the center of our entire social circle, someone whose knowledge of the truth would ensure it traveled efficiently and accurately, and I told her the facts, not with drama, not with tears, just facts, delivered clearly with the receipts to back them up. If you've ever let the truth do the heavy lifting so you didn't have to, hit that like button and subscribe. Because the truth, properly delivered, is the most devastating weapon there is, and Brianna was about to find that out. There is a particular rhythm to the way truth travels through a close-knit family, and once it starts moving, there is absolutely nothing in this world that can stop it. By Monday evening, Aunt Renee knew. By Tuesday afternoon, 3 cousins knew. By Wednesday morning, Brianna's best friend Simone, who had apparently been suspicious of her own accord for weeks, called me directly, unprompted, to say she wasn't surprised and that she was sorry. I had not orchestrated a campaign. I had simply told the truth to the right people and allowed human nature to handle the rest. Our family talked. They always had. The difference this time was that the story traveling through every phone call and text thread wasn't Brianna's carefully edited version. It was mine, documented, specific, and impossible to dismiss. I know this because Brianna called me Wednesday night, and she was not crying performance tears this time. She was furious. "You told everyone," she said the moment I picked up. Her voice had a tight, shaking quality I'd never heard from her before, the sound of someone who has always controlled the narrative suddenly finding themselves outside of it. "I told the truth," I said calmly. "There's a difference." "You humiliated me, Cassidy." I let that sentence exist in the air between us for a long, quiet moment before I responded. "Brianna," I said, You fabricated a pregnancy to destroy my engagement. You sat across from me in a cafe and told me my fiancé was in love with you. You went to our mother's house and rewrote the entire story before I had a chance to speak. You have been lying to this family for 3 years. I paused. I simply stopped letting you be the only one talking. Silence. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, and underneath the fury, I heard it, the thing she'd been hiding beneath every aggressive move she'd made. Fear. Raw, genuine fear of being truly seen for the first time. "I don't want anything from you right now," I said honestly. "I want you to sit with what you did. I want you to feel the weight of it without anyone rushing in to make it lighter for you. That's all." I heard her breath catch. "And Brianna," I added, "when you're ready, not now, but someday, I'd like you to talk to someone, a professional, because what you did came from a wound that has nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with you." I hung up gently. If you've ever responded to someone's chaos with calm and watched it devastate them more thoroughly than any argument could, subscribe, because composure is the ultimate power move. But the story wasn't finished yet, because Marcus had been very quiet for 5 days, and quiet men are always planning something. I should have anticipated it. In hindsight, the signs were all there. The unanswered texts that were just slightly too sparse, the single brief voicemail he left Thursday morning saying only that he was giving me space, the unusual silence from a man who had always expressed himself readily and openly. Marcus was preparing something. I found out what it was on Friday evening when my doorbell rang at 7 p.m. and I opened the door to find him standing there, holding a manila envelope, dressed like he'd come straight from the office, looking like he hadn't slept in approximately 1,000 years. "I need 10 minutes, he said. "Please." I considered him for a long moment. Then I stepped aside. He sat in the armchair across from the couch, notably not the couch itself, not my space, the separate chair, which told me he'd thought carefully about body language and boundaries, which was either growth or performance, and I wasn't yet sure which. He placed the manila envelope on the coffee table between us. "I spent this week doing the one thing I should have done 3 years ago, being completely honest, with myself first, then with you." I looked at the envelope. "What is that?" "Proof," he said simply, "that I went to therapy every day this week, that I've retained a counselor going forward, that I've been in contact with a pastor we both respect about accountability." He paused. "And a letter that I wrote and rewrote 11 times before I was satisfied it said what I actually meant, rather than what I thought you wanted to hear." I didn't reach for the envelope. "Marcus, I'm not here to ask you to take the ring back," he said quickly, and something in his voice told me that sentence had cost him enormously. "I know I don't have the right to ask that right now, maybe ever. What I'm here to say is that I understand, for the first time with complete clarity, what I actually did. Not just the Brianna situation, the pattern, the avoidance, the conflict I chose to absorb quietly rather than bring to you, because I was afraid of what honest conversation might cost me." He looked at his hands. "I was a coward, and cowardice dressed up as peacekeeping is still cowardice." The room was very quiet. Here's the thing about hearing someone say exactly the right thing at exactly the wrong time. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing at a crossroads in the rain, watching a road you loved close behind you while a new one opens ahead, and not being certain yet which direction leads somewhere worth going. If you've ever been offered the apology you deserved 6 months too late, hit that like button and subscribe. Because I picked up that envelope, and what was inside it changed the next part of my decision completely. I didn't read it while Marcus was there. I walked him to the door, thanked him for coming, which felt surreal and formal and necessary all at once, and stood at my window watching his car pull away from the curb before I returned to the couch, picked up the manila envelope, and held it in my hands for a full 5 minutes without opening it. There is something about a handwritten letter in the age of text messages and emails that carries a specific gravity. Someone sat down, held a pen, and chose every word with the permanence of ink. You can't unsend it. You can't edit it at 2 in the morning. It exists, physically, as a record of exactly what someone was willing to commit to paper and hand to another human being. I opened it. Marcus's handwriting is small and precise, architectural almost, which has always reflected something true about him. A man who valued order, who built careful structures around himself. The letter was 4 pages, front and back. I know because I counted before I started reading. I am not going to share every word. Some things belong only to the people they were written for. But I will tell you what it contained because it is relevant to every decision that came after. He wrote about the conference in Charlotte, about the moment he saw me across that packed room and felt, in his own words, like finding something I hadn't known I was looking for. He wrote about deliberately not mentioning his brief history with Brianna because he'd convinced himself it was irrelevant, too short, too long ago, already over, and how that single act of omission had metastasized over 3 years into something that infected everything. He wrote about February, about the fight, about the terrible, weak moment when Brianna called and he answered because he was hurting and she was familiar and he was, in his own brutal self-assessment, too much of a coward to bring my pain to the person I'd promised to be honest with. He wrote about the engagement party, about how Brianna had cornered him near the rose bushes and told him she still had feelings for him, and how he'd said nothing to me because he didn't want to ruin the night. And then, on the final page, he wrote something that I had to read 3 times before I let myself feel it. Quote, "You deserved a man who brought you his whole truth from the beginning. I gave you a curated version of myself and called it love. I know now that real love requires the courage to be fully known, flaws, failures, and all. Whether or not you ever forgive me, I want you to know that you taught me that. You, by walking away with your dignity intact, showed me what integrity actually looks like." Unquote. If you've ever been someone's greatest lesson at the cost of your own peace, subscribe. Because I finished that letter, and then I sat alone with the hardest question I'd ever faced. I called Tasha at 11 o'clock that night, which she answered immediately because Tasha operates on best friend time, meaning she's available at all hours for matters of genuine emotional emergency. "I read the letter," I said. And her voice was careful, measured, giving me nothing that would influence my answer before I'd fully found it myself. This is why she is irreplaceable. "It was real," I said. "I know his writing, I know his voice. There was no performance in it." "Okay," she said. "So what are you feeling?" I looked around my apartment, the hand-painted accent wall, the engagement party photos I still hadn't taken down, the ring box sitting on my bookshelf where I'd placed it after Piedmont Park because I couldn't bring myself to put it anywhere less visible or anywhere more prominent. "Conflicted," I said honestly, which is somehow worse than angry. Angry is clean. Conflicted is just messy and exhausting and human. "Do you still love him?" I closed my eyes. "That was never the question, Tasha. I stopped loving him approximately never. But love has never been the only factor in whether something is right." She was quiet for a moment. "So what is the question?" "The question," I said slowly, working it out as I spoke, "is whether I trust myself enough to know the difference between forgiving someone because they've genuinely changed and forgiving someone because I'm tired of being without them. Those two things can feel identical from the inside, and I refuse to make a permanent decision based on exhaustion." Tasha exhaled. "That might be the most self-aware thing you've ever said. I've had a lot of quiet time recently." We talked for another hour, not about Marcus specifically, not about Brianna, not about the wedding that wasn't happening in 7 months. We talked about me, about who I was before this happened, who I'd been during it, and who I intended to be going forward, regardless of any decision I made about anyone else. By the time we hung up, something had settled in me. Not a conclusion exactly, more like a foundation, solid ground beneath my feet after weeks of standing on shifting sand. I woke up Saturday morning with clarity that felt earned rather than forced. I was not getting back together with Marcus. Not now. Not in this version of our story where the wounds were still raw and the work he needed to do was just beginning. And the work I needed to do, on myself, for myself, was equally unfinished. But I was also not closing a door permanently based on who he was 3 weeks ago. I was choosing something radical instead. I was choosing time. If you've ever refused to let someone else's timeline become your emergency, hit that like button and subscribe, because my final decision wasn't about Marcus at all. It was entirely, completely, unapologetically about me. My mother called a family dinner 3 weeks after everything came out, which is the most Southern thing I can possibly imagine. The instinct to process collective trauma around a table with food involved. She called it a family conversation, which is the diplomatic term our family uses for an event that everyone knows is going to be uncomfortable, but that everyone attends anyway because not showing up would be its own statement. Brianna came. I knew she would. Disappearing would have confirmed everything, and Brianna has never been capable of walking away from a room she feels she can still work. I arrived early and helped my mother set the table, which gave me something to do with my hands and a reason to stand in the kitchen away from the living room while everyone filtered in. Aunt Renee, Cousin Deja, 2 other cousins whose expressions when they greeted me carried the particular weight of people who know more than they're saying out loud. Brianna arrived last, which was itself a choice. She walked in wearing understated colors again. She'd developed a whole costuming strategy around this situation and hugged our mother first, then moved through the room with careful, measured warmth. When she reached me, she stopped. We looked at each other across 3 feet of our mother's living room and 28 years of shared history, and for one suspended moment, the entire room held its breath. "Cassidy," she said quietly. "Brianna," I said back. We sat down. My mother, who is small and soft-spoken and possesses a titanium spine beneath both of those qualities, waited until everyone had filled their plates before she set down her fork, folded her hands, and spoke. I called this dinner because this family does not heal in silence. We heal by telling the truth and then deciding together what we're going to do with it. So that's what we're going to do tonight. What followed was the most honest 2 hours I have ever spent in that house. My mother laid out the facts plainly, not dramatically, not accusatorily, simply as a sequence of events that had occurred and that everyone in the room deserved to understand fully. She did not editorialize. She did not assign villains. She presented the truth the way a surgeon presents a diagnosis. Clearly, completely, and with the understanding that knowing the full picture is the only basis for genuine healing. Brianna sat through all of it without interrupting. When my mother finished, the room was very quiet. Then Brianna looked up, and she looked at me, and what I saw on her face was not the performance I'd been bracing for. It was shame. Real, unguarded, bottomless shame. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just need everyone to know that I know what I did." If you've ever watched someone finally stop running from themselves, subscribe, because that was only the second most important thing that happened at that dinner table. 6 months after the night that cracked my life down the middle, I stood in my Savannah apartment watching the sun rise over the marsh, coffee in hand, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel so soon. Peace. Not the fragile, performative peace of someone pretending to be fine. Not the exhausted peace of someone who has simply run out of energy to be in pain. The deep, settled, bone-level peace of a woman who walked through the worst betrayal of her life and came out the other side knowing herself more completely than she ever had before. Let me tell you where everyone landed. Brianna started therapy 3 weeks after the family dinner. Not because anyone forced her, because she chose it. Our relationship is not repaired. It may never be fully repaired, and I have made peace with that possibility. What I refuse to do is carry hatred for her like luggage into the next chapter of my life. She is my sister. She is also someone who hurt me in ways that require time and consistent changed behavior before trust can be rebuilt. Both things are simultaneously true, and I am learning to hold them both without forcing a resolution before it's ready. My mother and I are closer than we have ever been. That alone, that unexpected gift hidden inside the wreckage, has been worth more than I can quantify. Marcus completed 3 months of consistent therapy. He reached out in month 2, not to ask for anything, but simply to tell me he was doing the work regardless of outcome. I respected that more than I expected to. Where that goes, I genuinely don't know yet. I have learned to be comfortable with open endings, which is its own form of growth for a woman who used to need every plan finalized and every future mapped. And me? I got a promotion at work. I finished repainting my living room, new color this time, a deep sage green that makes me happy every single morning. I started running, which I always swore I hated, and it turns out I only hated it because I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I have been to 4 concerts, 2 art exhibitions, and 1 weekend trip to New Orleans with Tasha that I will not be elaborating on for legal reasons. I am not the woman I was the night of that engagement party. That woman was happy in the way that people are happy when they haven't yet been tested, brightly, easily, without full knowledge of her own strength. I am happy differently now, deliberately, eyes open. The payout, it turns out, was never about Brianna's humiliation or Marcus's regret or any external consequence delivered to anyone else. The payout was this: me standing in my own light, completely undiminished. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to know that surviving betrayal isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your best one.